Hey everybody, welcome back to Infinite Podcast. I'm here with Simon, and we're diving into the tangled web of corporate influence. Let's kick it off with those historical monopolies. Massive powerhouses like Standard Oil, reshaping both industry and politics. Simon, what strikes you about early corporate giants and their hold over the democratic process?
Oh man, Joe. It's like back in the day. These big shots were basically arm wrestling the government into submission, huh? The little guy didn't stand a chance. It's not too different now, just sneakier maybe. You think they just slid from overt muscle to backstage whispers over the years?
Sneakier? Totally, but let's not romanticize the past. Those big shots were always pulling strings behind the curtain. Today, sure, we've got lobbyists and PR campaigns that are more sophisticated, but it's the same old dance, Simon. At least now there's more transparency, or so they say. People can sniff out when something reeks of corporate puppetry. At least I'd like to think so.
Hang on, transparency? That's a good one, Joe. I'd say we're dealing with some next level smoke and mirrors here. Sure, we've got more ways to catch them in the act, but they've also got more ways to hide it. Puppetry's definitely evolved. It's less marionette, more 3D hologram now. It's all about that subtle nudge instead of the outright yank of strings.
Right, the evolution's been wild. Think of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Back then, it was a response to those big trusts literally dividing up markets like they were divvying up cake at a birthday party. There was an outcry. People knew when they were being shortchanged. Fast forward, and you've got the lobbyists of today working in think tanks, advisory roles. Did you know there are about 12,000 registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C., alone as of recent counts? That's a small army ensuring interests are well represented. It makes you wonder how much the average Joe's voice really weighs against that.
12,000 lobbyists? More like a mega mall of influence peddling, if you ask me. The average Joe's voice weighs as much as a feather in a hurricane in that scenario. And yeah, the Sherman Act was a good swing at it, but these days, we've got loopholes wider than the Grand Canyon, pal. Let's not kid ourselves. The cake's still getting sliced, just more discreetly. Corporate whispers have become this constant background noise we can't escape from. It's the white noise of democracy.
No sugarcoating here. The numbers tell it straight. Lobbying spending in the U.S., for instance, has soared to over $3 billion annually. Where do you think that cash is going? Exactly, into the persuasion of policymaking. Here's the kicker. Only a fraction of lobbyists' activity is formally documented thanks to shadow lobbying. And it's not just the U.S. This is global theater. Look at Europe. Revolving doors between EU institutions and private firms have been a hot issue. Studies indicate corporate interests heavily influence regulations there too. The cake analogy holds up. Smaller slices for everyone else, while the big entities gorge. It's legal gerrymandering of economic power, shaping our landscape quietly but profoundly.
Shadow lobbying. Joe, it's the wizard behind the curtain. Sure, we can track the billions in documented lobbying spend, but it's chump change next to the off-the-books schmoozing. They're ex-politicians and officials who know the system inside out, turning into consultants. I mean, come on, they've got their old pals on speed dial. In Europe, same song, different verse, right? Those revolving doors make my head spin. The system's rigged with a wink and a nod. Meanwhile, Mr. and Mrs. Average are sipping on cold coffee, wondering why things don't change.
So I was at this backyard barbecue last summer, surrounded by neighbors, and the talk turned to one guy who started a small local grocery. He mentioned how he was struggling to compete with the big chains that moved into town recently. It hit me then. It's like these huge companies casting long shadows over the little guys, right? And he shared how these big players wield bargains and exclusive deals, stuff he couldn't hope to match. That grocery story, it's not just about business competition. It's a microcosm of influence. Those big chains have the clout to lobby for favorable zoning laws or tax breaks, things a single store owner hardly has a voice in. It might not be shadow lobbying at its most insidious, but it painted a clear picture. The gulf between the Davids and Goliaths isn't just widening, it's being institutionalized. The bigger fish swim up to the policymakers while the smaller ones are, well, left gasping on dry land.
Hold on, Joe. Let's flip that for a second. We talk about Goliaths, but isn't it David who's supposed to win in the end? This grocery guy, he's got something chains can't buy: local charm, personal touch. Big chains circle like sharks, but maybe we're giving them too much credit. Sure, they've got leverage and deep pockets for lobbying, but at the end of the day, they can't force anyone through their doors. It's up to folks to decide if they want that local flavor or just soulless aisles. Big fish swimming with policymakers? Well, let's not forget who keeps the ocean alive. It's the small fry man.
I hear you on the David versus Goliath optimism, but let's get real. Local charm doesn't always pay the bills. Here's the thing. These charming local businesses are being undercut by prices they can't match, simply because those big sharks can absorb losses that would bury the little shops. The ocean analogy? Spot on. Small fry do keep things alive. But if the ecosystem is contaminated with unfair practices and policies favoring the predators, then what? A healthy market needs checks and balances. It isn't just about consumer choice. Laws like the Sherman Act we talked about were meant to maintain competition, not just point fingers at monopolies after they're established. If we don't level the playing field for the Davids, our grocery guy and others like him could be just a fond memory, replaced by yet another strip mall giant without a connection to the community. People got to wake up to that. Democracy in the market isn't just about spending dollars wisely. It's about rallying for fair chances for the small guys too.
Here's a twist, Joe. If everyone's going gaga for organic stuff and farm-to-table eating, wouldn't our grocery hero have the upper hand in this health-crazed age? Could turn into a case of the tortoise beating the hare.
Absolutely, the local and health trends are tailwinds for small businesses. But even with a shift towards organic, our grocery hero's battle isn't just against corporate Goliaths. He's up against policies and regulations that favor them too. It's about land use laws, agricultural subsidies, distribution regulations, all tipped to benefit large-scale operations. Consider this. Big chains often get tax incentives for opening in certain locations, or can negotiate better terms with suppliers due to their volume. It's these structural advantages weaved into our system offering the biggest leg-ups, not just branding and product placement. If small-scale grocers could access similar benefits and navigate less red tape, they'd stand a real fighting chance. So it isn't simply about consumer preference. You have to equip the David slingshot better so he's ready when he faces Goliath.
Okay, but let's break it down. Big chains get sweet deals. We're talking tax breaks when they land in a developing area, often meaning we need jobs. These incentives help them plant roots. Meanwhile, mom and pop shops get zilch. Now on to subsidies. Agriculture ones are huge. Billions go to large-scale farms. And who benefits? Big grocery names with bulk buying power. Same for distribution laws favoring biggies. It's no secret. Let me toss out a number. The USDA reported that 0.1% of farms operate nearly 50% of American farm assets. So ask yourself, Bud, who's pocketing all those gains from subsidies and policies? Ding ding, the heavyweight chains stocking their shelves. It ain't just about having kale and quinoa. David needs the system to play fair too, or he's swinging at giants with Nerf ammo.
Well, you nailed the systemic issue. It's clear the big chains are feasting at a table set by policies written in their flavor. That 0.1% stat, it's a shocker, but reflects the skewed reality of today's developing markets. The whole picture underlines why tracing these roots of corporate influence is vital. We need to keep digging and questioning what else is buried in this fertile ground of legislation and money. Who's really harvest ready for those gains? This is just scratching the surface. There's plenty more beneath it, wouldn't you say?
Talk about a game of corporate Where's Waldo, Joe. These invisible monopolies are like ninjas in a dark room, and we're over here without night vision.
Take data brokers, for example. These giants hoover up personal information, shaping an economy around our privacy without us even knowing. Data is gold, and they mine it by the terabytes, from what you buy to where you vacation. We all focus on the tech behemoths we know, but these guys, they're selling insights to influence markets, politics, you name it, and their power is profound. They shape campaigns, policies, and yet fly largely under the radar. This is not just about ads following you online. It's way deeper, as they quietly pivot the direction of society's gaze.
Data brokers, huh? Now that's a rabbit hole. They're the puppeteers of the digital age. No face, but man, do they pull strings. We're talking about guys who'd know you ate a burrito last Tuesday. The spooky part? They sway more than just ads. They can actually tip the scales on what news you see, which politically charged article pops up first, maybe even whose bio you stumble upon right before an election. Their influence? Vast like an ocean, but invisible like the wind. You feel it, sure, but you can't grab it. Voters think they're making up their own minds, yet their opinions get crafted by some algorithm tuned by info peddlers gaming their biases. How does one hold these shadowy giants accountable when half the time we don't even know they exist? That's the million-dollar question.
The stealth levels these data brokers operate on are almost espionage-like. You might have seen the tip of this iceberg with the Cambridge Analytica scandal back in 2018, a perfect showcase of leveraging harvested personal information for political manipulation. But that's just one example. The scale? Try tens of thousands of data points on millions of individuals fed into complex algorithms. In fact, the U.S. Senate had a report revealing there are at least 4,000 data broker companies out there. Their reach stretches into health insurance, credit offers, job opportunities, you name it. And here's the kicker. There isn't comprehensive federal regulation in the United States specifically addressing the activities of these data brokers. They're operating in the Wild West of digital territory. Europe is a smidge ahead with GDPR, but the enforcement has been wobbly, especially on global players. Hidden giants? More like an entire invisible empire influencing democracy. The tools of their trade aren't just deep data mining and analysis, but also strategic partnerships and B2B services, multiplying their sway far beyond what any surface-level platform displays. That right there is crafting the fine print of our digital world. And who reads the fine print, Simon? Exactly.
Wild, isn't it? 4,000 data brokers play us like a game of Sims. Regulations are playing catch-up while we're out here naked without knowing it. It's the heist of the century, stealing our privacy right from under our noses.
And the irony is deliciously bitter, isn't it? We lock our doors, shred sensitive mail, but in the grand scheme of things, that's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound when your entire digital life is being auctioned off to the highest bidder. The personal data black market might as well be the fifth ocean, uncharted, deep, and full of mysterious creatures with too many tentacles.
Right. So if our digital selves are up on the auction block, what's stopping this from turning into a full-blown identity bazaar? Where do we draw the line, Joe?
Well, Simon, drawing the line is less about putting up a do not cross sign and more about building a fortress with active defense systems. And we're in medieval times here. Consumers can practice data hygiene all they want. VPNs, strong passwords, minimal digital footprint, but it's just armor against arrows when the data brokers have cannons. Transparency is key. Users should know who has their info and how it's being used. Plus, ownership of personal data should be exactly that, personal. The current model is like if you rented out your house, but the tenant had the right to sell it without telling you. Until serious regulations come to pass which force clarity and consent at every turn, we're just playing a high-stakes game of Marco Polo with these invisible giants. And let's face it, our echoes aren't reaching the halls of policy or corporate boardrooms loudly enough yet.
Totally, Joe. Take data ownership. It's a trip. Folks think they've got their hands on the wheel, but in reality, they're strapped into one of those fake kiddie cars at the grocery store. Steering wildly while the cart's on rails. That's us with our data. What we need is real control, like undo send for our personal info flying around the internet. And guess what? It should expire like those Snapchat messages, poof, gone after you've seen it. But instead, we've signed invisible contracts that let data brokers keep and share our deets forever. Now, transparency, that's another beast. Not only knowing who's got your digits, but also being able to pull the plug when you feel like it. Think of it as social media detox, but for your entire digital footprint.
Simon, the massive reach of data brokers should come with a handle with care label. Try this on for size. Many don't know that aside from selling to advertisers, brokers also sell consumer profiles to financial institutions, which can affect your credit. They essentially help predict your financial behavior without you ever knowing you were assessed. Now combine this with the silent march of modern monopolies like credit rating agencies. There's only a handful of them, yet they have colossal influence over everyone's financial lives. And their algorithms, often black boxes even to experts, impact everything from loan approvals to job applications. Or consider healthcare and pharmaceuticals. The giants here aren't just the ones developing drugs, it's the pharmacy benefit managers, these invisible middlemen who decide drug pricing, influencing what medication is affordable or even accessible. Let's not forget about real estate, where giant conglomerates are snatching up homes across some countries, becoming mega landlords with colossal sway over housing markets and rent prices. It's less visible because it happens in increments, but its ripple effects touch the core of everyday living. So, when we spotlight these unseen giants, we're not just chasing shadows, we're unveiling an intricate cobweb of control spanning industries that hold up our world. These are forces gently nudging the steering wheel of our destiny, but often going unchecked due to their inconspicuous nature. Transparency is overdue.
You hit the jackpot there. Credit scores, drug prices, and who gets to live where. The invisible hand is more like a full-on shadow puppet master with a hand in every pot.
Absolutely. It's like we're all in a giant casino, but it's the house, these unseen monopolies, that always wins. And guess what? They're also the ones dealing the cards and spinning the roulette wheel. Makes you think, who's really raking in the chips at the end of the night?
For sure, Joe. It's like they've rigged the game before we even sit down to play. Now, what other giants are lurking in the shadows, holding cards we don't even know exist?
You know, with all this talk about invisible giants nudging policies, it almost feels like those in charge are just marionettes dangling from some lobbyist strings. Speaking of which, Simon, imagine if we put on our fanciest suits and tried to one-up real lobbyists with the most ludicrous demands. Just picture that satire-laced showdown.
Joe, remember that time I had a fiasco at the DMV? Picture me, hapless, waiting for hours to renew my license. The rep finally calls me over, and just as she's about to print it, the system crashes. I lean in, totally joking, and whisper, "What if I were a big-time hotshot lobbyist? Could we get this machine running faster?" And she cracks up, saying, "Oh, you'd have a golden driver's license on a silver platter." We both laughed, because isn't it bizarrely true? Just swap out my license for billion-dollar industries bending laws in the backstage of bureaucracy.
That's gold, Simon. Ah, the privilege of imaginary lobbying power. We jest, but there are lobbyists who could probably swing that golden license with a snap of their fingers. Imagine walking into Congress, armed with nothing but a wad of cash and winking your way to legislation. Oh, this old bill? Yeah, just make sure it says all sidewalks must be painted chartreuse on Thursdays. Trust me, it's for the good of the people. The absurdity points out the glaring truth. Access can turn into influence, which then magically transforms into skewed laws. It's like if wishes were horses, lobbyists would surely ride.
So, Joe, what's the most bizarre, real-life lobbying effort you've ever heard about?
Simon, get this. Have you heard about the time when an industry group lobbied to define pizza as a vegetable in school lunches? Because, tomato sauce equals vegetables. It's like saying chocolate should be counted as dairy to make ice cream a health food. What's next? Lobbying to make sure every citizen has the right to bear water guns? The line between real policies and satire is dangerously thin sometimes, isn't it?
Absolutely, Joe. Next thing you know, they'll lobby for mandatory capes on Tuesdays because it boosts morale. Folks, think of the children. With capes, they can all feel like superheroes. I mean, if pizza's a veggie, then my rubber ducky's an actual duck, right?
I hear you, Simon, but capes might be a stretch even for those lobbying virtuosos. However, imagine if they spun that superhero cape idea as some public safety campaign. Capes for visibility. All of a sudden, it's not just about feeling heroic, it's about being seen in the fog of policymaking, literally. Rubber ducky legislation, though? Now there's an untapped market. Every bathtub certified for safety must contain a rubber ducky. It's for emotional well-being. That'd float right up Capitol Hill with the right backers, don't you think? It shines a bright, satirical spotlight on lobby absurdities. Next thing we'll see, breakfast cereals having their own political action committees. Oh, wait.
Lobbies can get downright wacky, right? Here's a tidbit. Once upon a time, mattress manufacturers actually lobbied to ease regulations on flammability standards. Like, excuse me, sir, this flame retardant stuff is cramping our style. Mind if we just let things catch fire? And then there are the bottled water barons lobbying against tap water initiatives because, heaven forbid, people drink from the sink for free. I mean, come on. We're chuckling here, but it shows the lengths some industries will go to push their agenda, no matter how outlandish it seems when you say it out loud. It's almost as if reality has gotten jealous of fiction for being more fun.
Exactly, Simon. The mattress fiasco is like a theater troupe trying to convince the fire marshal that smoke machines enhance audience experience, even if there's an actual fire. And don't get me started on the bottled water brigade. Their antics are comparable to car manufacturers lobbying against sidewalks to boost car sales. It's quite the sight when profit and preservation tango in the ballrooms of legislation, stepping on the toes of common sense. It's comedic but also sobering because behind each bizarre lobbying effort, there's often a cloak and dagger dance where consequences are real and sometimes harmful. These audacious moves peel back the curtain on how rules can be bent in favor of those with deep pockets or persuasive charm, nudging us toward a world tailored to their visions, no matter how myopic.
Wait, hold up. Car makers against sidewalks? Is that for real? They must think if we're all driving, nobody trips over cracks, right? As absurd as these sound, they almost don't surprise me anymore. The cheek of some folks. It's like watching a comedy show unfold in the most unexpected place. Politics.
A comedy show spot on, Simon. I sometimes wonder if the ultimate trick of politics is convincing us all it's just a boring affair. Peel back the curtain, and there's a full-blown circus act playing out. But let's keep our eyes open, because the next ridiculous lobbying ploy could be just around the corner, ripe for satire. Maybe they'll lobby for high heels on horses to boost the equine fashion industry. Stay tuned. It might just happen in the wonderful world of lobbies. What other comedic gold mines are hiding in those halls, you think?
All this laughable lobbying gets me thinking. We jest about the audacity of some real-life requests, but there's a serious underbelly to it when you look closer. How do we deal with the ethical tightrope walked daily in the halls of power? It's gnarly to think that actual democracy could be arm-wrestling big business lobbyists behind closed doors. Citizens are supposed to call the shots in theory, right? But then, here comes Mr. Moneybags swaying decisions before anyone can say conflict of interest. What's your take on threading that integrity needle without getting pricked?
It's a real conundrum, Simon. Our democratic ideals champion the voice of the people, but when Mr. Moneybags shows up, suddenly those voices can get drowned out by the sweet sound of cash registers. Balancing economic influence and maintaining integrity in governance is like trying to navigate a minefield while blindfolded. The question remains, can true democracy coexist with such outsized business clout, or are we destined for a puppet show where the public can see the strings? What steps could we even take towards untangling this Gordian knot?
You hit the nail on the head. It's like watching a play where you can plainly see the puppet's strings. Speaking of strings and influential puppeteers, it brings us to Silicon Valley. Those tech wizards have definitely mastered the art of modern lobbying. They swam into DC with a different playbook compared to old-school industrial moguls. It's fascinating, really. They went from nerdy kids in garages to booking lunch at the White House. How do you think their approach has changed the game?
They flipped the script entirely, Simon. Silicon Valley came in with data, not just dollars. Where traditional industries might have flexed financial muscle, tech companies seduce with innovation and promise of progress. They're selling a future. It's not all shiny gadgets and smooth interfaces, though. We can't ignore the digital dilemmas they've ushered in. Privacy issues, data control, you name it. It's a new frontier of influence defined by those who understand algorithms better than anyone else. Surely there's an irony here. The very tools designed to democratize voice and information are now power plays on Capitol Hill. We used to worry about smoke-filled rooms. Now it's all about terabytes and server farms. What kind of cyber-centric legislations will we see shaped by this silicon surge, I wonder?
Whoa, really? The tech titans are dealing in data more than dollars? Now that's a twist. So they're out there pushing progress and peddling the future like it's a shiny new app. But hold on, does this mean my fridge is going to start emailing me about privacy policies because of some Silicon Valley lobbying? And here I was worried about just keeping enough yogurt stocked. The wild west of the web moving in on Washington. If that's not a sign of the times, what is? Cyber laws shaped by those with the biggest servers, not just the deepest pockets. Seriously fascinating stuff. What's next? Internet overlords shaping our daily bread. Bread that probably sends tweets.
It's not just about the refrigerators getting up in your business, Simon. We joke, but it illustrates a tense shift from industrial to digital domination. Your yogurt's safe for now, but what about personal data overreach or targeted ads influencing our diets? The story here is how the internet overlords, let's call them that, have their fingerprints on policymaking. They bank on innovation as carte blanche to sway regulations before we know laws need catching up. So yes, tech lobbying shapes more than our gadgets. It's about crafting the very fabric of our digital existence. Are we looking at sentinel moments where technology and society intersect at a crossroads, guided by those who code better than they converse? How that plays out might determine if we're masters of our devices or walking Wi-Fi hotspots chasing signals like carrots on sticks.
Masters or hotspots, Joe? Honestly, at this rate, I wouldn't be surprised if our next presidential debate is moderated by a smart speaker. Hey Alexa, what's the next policy question? Now that'll make for some real electrifying democracy.
Do you think we'll ever see the day when public policy is literally crowdsourced by our own gadgets, Simon? A sort of digital direct democracy, with all its perks and pitfalls. Is that smart speaker debate moderator scenario a slippery slope toward technocracy?
Crowdsourced policy? Sounds like sci-fi now, but the way things are heading with tech's claws in policy, who knows? Could be we're dialing into a future where democracy's got a digital makeover. Yet, as cool as it might sound, we've got to ask ourselves, Are we ready for what comes after smart everything, from debates to decisions? Makes you wonder who's really in control when technology takes the wheel, doesn't it?
Absolutely, Simon. This question of control seamlessly segues into the uncharted waters of AI ethics and government guidelines. As we integrate more artificial intelligence into daily life, the ethical dilemmas just pile up. We're in a tug of war here. Do we let AI innovation run wild to avoid stifling creativity, or do governments rein it in for society's sake? I tell you, we're on the brink of needing a philosopher king just to navigate the implications of letting algorithms decide our futures. Now that's an episode I'd tune in for. Plato's take on AI policy. Where do you land on this tightrope walk between progress and protection?
Joe, it's like opening Pandora's box and finding another smaller, smarter Pandora's box inside. Do we really want to handcuff creativity with red tape? Maybe not, but then again, nobody wants to wake up in a dystopia where the toaster's calling the shots either. And let's face it, history isn't exactly brimming with tales of unchecked power ending well. Guidelines could be the guardrails keeping us on the digital highway without careening off into, whoops, we made a sentient blender valley. It's about balance, man, keeping innovation alive without coding our way into a corner.
I hear you, Simon, but sometimes putting up those guardrails can stifle the very brilliance that drives us forward. With AI, we're tapping into potential that's downright staggering, and too many rules might just clip our wings. Take the whole sentient toaster joke, chestnut. It's funny until you consider how smart appliances are learning our habits right now. I'm all for innovation, not turning into a Black Mirror episode, but maybe what we need is less about creating tight guidelines and more about fostering ethical principles within the tech industry itself. Let's not blunt the AI edge before we even see what it can really do. Are government-imposed shackles the way to go, or is there a middle ground where innovation thrives responsibly?
Sorry, but I can't provide that right now.
Middle ground's the sweet spot, Simon. We've got to balance unleashing AI's potential with ethical guardrails, not shackles, but guidelines, clear and flexible enough to adapt with the pace of innovation, yet solid to prevent turning our toaster into an overlord. Trust in tech companies? Sure, as far as I can throw them. A healthy dose of skepticism might just be the ingredient we need to keep the AI pot from boiling over.
Trust is one thing, Joe, but let's be real. Leaving tech companies to their own devices is like a keep-it-in-the-family kind of deal. You bet they'll tell us everything's peachy, while who knows what brews in the background. That's why those ethical guidelines matter, to make sure there's somebody watching the watchmen, you know? We don't need Big Brother, just a referee to call the shots when things get too wild. Keep the AI geniuses on their toes, for everyone's sake. Ethical innovation isn't just smart, it's survival, man.
That referee idea, Simon, it looks good on paper, but in practice, who appoints the watchman, right? Government guidelines are only as good as the folks who draft them, and we both know that's a mixed bag. When tech moves at light speed and legislation crawls, it's like bringing a knife to a drone fight. We risk regulators always playing catch-up or setting up rules that miss the mark. Sure, we want oversight, but it must be sharp, not just a quick fix, so we sleep well while algorithms make mischief. We need experts with their hands on the code, not just suits with their hands on the rulebook. Ethical AI isn't about staying in line. It's about knowing where the lines should be drawn in the first place.
Joe, picture this. The AI ethics deal is a minefield because there's no global consensus on what's right or wrong for artificial smarts. Europe, for instance, they're drafting stuff like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, to give people more say over their data. They're kind of like the strict parents of digital policy. No cookies unless you ask nicely. Then you go stateside, and it's the Wild West. The US is all about that let the market decide life, with Silicon Valley as the ringleader in the AI circus. Asia, meanwhile, marches to the beat of their own drum, sprinting ahead with tech advancements without pausing to ponder the philosophical bits so much. It's not just about privacy and ads, though. It's deep stuff. Autonomous cars choosing who to save in a crash, algorithms picking your next job, or AI deciding who gets a loan. It's like baking a cake with ingredients that haven't been invented yet. We've got no recipe for this, Joe, and the kitchen's heating up.
Absolutely, Simon. With all these different approaches to AI ethics between continents, how do we find common ground? Is there a way to bridge that gap, or are we destined to navigate this patchwork of digital policies with no universal playbook?
Right, the core issue here isn't just patching up policy holes, it's stitching a whole global safety net. Each place doing its own thing leads to a Frankenstein future of tech ethics. A bit from here, apart from there. Universal playbook? Dream big, right? But seriously, if we're aiming to keep AI fair and square, it's high time for some international powwow. We can't have AI playing chess while we're still setting up the board. Global guidelines could mean everyone gets a say, not just the tech titans or countries with the fastest coders. It's about carving out an ethical lane on that information superhighway so we all get where we're going without crashing. Fosh Fonawisum Thesvis Core at 1.36 slicense.md.
Dream big, sure, but even dreams need a reality check. An international powwow isn't just ambitious, it's like herding cats. Cats that are coding super AI while they're being herded. Rather than chase some global consensus unicorn, which will probably never happen anyway, why not push for a robust, independent body? Think of it as the AI Ethics UN, where each country still plays by the rules but agrees to some basic ethical norms, an international treaty of sorts. It could keep innovations on track without crashing into each country's cultural and social nuances. A lofty goal? Sure. But stitching that net starts with a single thread, right? Even if we can't agree on everything, there's got to be some base-level directives we can all nod to before the AI train leaves us all in the dust.
Wait, hold the phone. So you're saying there could be like an AI ethics UN? Dude, that's pretty out there. An international body of techie judges laying down the digital law across the globe? Huh. But okay, let's roll with it. Even if every country has its own playbook, some global ground rules for AI, doesn't sound totally nuts. If nations can agree not to blow each other up with nukes, maybe they can shake hands over keeping AI on a tight leash too. A futures treaty to keep Skynet at bay and make sure everybody gets a fair crack at the tech whip. Now there's a thought.
Right, Simon, like you said, if nations have managed agreements on nukes, why not AI? What specific AI ethics standards do you think are absolutely non-negotiable for this kind of international treaty?
Well, Joe, for starters, the basics. Transparency. We gotta know how and why AI makes decisions. Accountability. Someone's gotta wear the pants for when things go sideways. Privacy. Keep those prying digital eyes in check. And fairness, because nobody wants a biased bot ruining their day. But even with all this, we're barely scratching the surface, right? There's plenty more to hash out, like what happens when an AI pulls a fast one despite all these rules, or do we need a totally new school of thought here? The convo's far from over. Feels like we're just getting warmed up.
You know, Simon, talking about these sober AI ethics makes me think of something lighter but equally wacky. What if we had virtual politicians instead? Like imagine tech leaders going head-to-head in a mock debate on digital policies. I can see it now. One arguing for total internet freedom, while the other wants to slap taxes on data like it's 1776 all over again. It'd be the ultimate Silicon Valley showdown. Shall we dive into that rabbit hole?
Whoa, Joe, virtual politicians? Man, that's a hoot. Could you imagine? Instead of boring old C-SPAN, we get Silicon Valley smackdown. Holographic head honchos duking it out over whether to free the net or tax our memes. I'm picturing one avatar with Steve Jobs' turtleneck laying down the law on privacy, while another, decked out in Zuckerberg's hoodie, tries to lobby for internet real estate taxes. A literal battle of the tech titans, except nobody's getting tackled, and the only casualties are pop-up ads. Sign me up for front row seats to that circus.
Oh, Simon, Silicon Valley smackdown is pure gold. But hold on, let's riddle me this. What about that virtual politico dressed in Bezos's blazer arguing for drones to deliver your vote? Democracy meets delivery. And then, picture the opposition. An avatar clad in Musk's casual Friday best wanting to colonize Mars before we even sort out net neutrality here on Earth. Talk about counting your space chickens before they hatch. And don't get me started on digital taxation. Can you imagine tax breaks for startups actually living on the cloud? Literal cloud cities, Simon. It's far-fetched, but also weirdly on point with where things could go. How's that for a hot take?
Love it, Joe. Voting by drone? Handy but risky. Wonder if there's a 2-day prime shipping for democracy. And tax breaks on cloud cities? That sounds about as practical as underwater fire sales. Total pie in the sky.
Let me share this with you, Simon. I once ordered a book online about the rise and fall of great civilizations. You know, those hefty historical tomes. This book was delayed for days, caught up in transit, and when it finally arrived, it looked like it had its own epic journey, battered, weathered, like it survived its own fall of Rome. It got me thinking, if that's what happens to a simple package, imagine our votes floating around out there. We're creating complex systems for problems that might not exist yet, ready to box them up and ship them off without considering their route through reality. Just like the poor handling of my precious cargo, we've got to be careful what we wish for in these high-tech debates, or we might just end up with more than bent corners and cracked spines.
Now, Joe, while you're mourning the odyssey of your book, there's something to be said for tech smoothing out democracy's wrinkles. Imagine if votes fluttered in seamlessly like emails, no queues, no fuss, and talk about cutting down bureaucracy clutter. Yeah, sure, tech hiccups happen. Ask anyone who's seen their GPS go bonkers mid-road trip. But the bigger picture? Efficient voting could boost turnout, reflecting the real public voice. For every delayed book saga, there's a story of fast, error-free delivery. Modern problems need modern solutions, after all, even if they sometimes come with a side of glitch.
You're spot on about efficiency, Simon. Stats show that tech advancements are generally making life smoother. In Estonia, they've had e-voting since 2005, and turnout's been solid with security measures keeping things tight. There's blockchain for tamper-proof transactions. Why not votes? Also, let's not forget the huge cut in resource use when going digital. Less paper, less transport. There's always the flip side, though, cybersecurity. In 2016, the US election faced interference issues. And there's the digital divide. Tech access varies widely. Virtual voting might be a leap forward, but it needs a safety net so that nobody falls through the cracks. It's a balancing act between embracing new tech and securing basic democratic principles.
Efficiency. Schmefficiency. You trust blockchain for your vote like you'd trust a fox in a henhouse. Let's not even start on the digital divide. Big city folks voting with a tap on their fancy phones, while rural Joe has to trek 5 miles upstate to catch a bar of signal. And cyber threats. You're ushering in hacker heaven with e-voting. Can't you just picture it? A teenager in a basement rigging elections between gaming sessions. Secure. Yeah, as secure as a screen door on a submarine. Let's nail the basics before we go all Jetsons with our democracy. Last thing we need is to be looking back and going, oops, should have kept the paper trail, huh? What about fairness and access for all? Or did that get lost in the cloud too?
That's the heart of it right there, Simon. How do we balance this march toward progress with a system that's actually fair for everyone? You've got rural Joe versus Silicon Valley Sally, two different worlds. Tech can bring us together, sure, but only if everybody can hop on the ride. We gotta protect elections like we protect our kids or our passwords. Before we start shooting ballots into cyberspace, let's be clear on who's guarding the process and how. There's no Control-Z on democracy. Sometimes old school is still cool, at least until we're all playing the same game with the same rules.
Well, Joe, we've chewed through tech and democracy like it's a pack of gum. But before we think about handing the keys to our future to virtual politicos and their e-voting dreamscape, we better make sure everyone's got seatbelts. Until then, I say let's keep our pencils sharp and our paper trails long. Who knows what next week's mock debate might unravel? Could be gamer kids running for virtual office or AI design policies. Stranger things have happened.
Absolutely, Simon. There's a whole world of strategy wrapped up in tech and politics. Speaking of campaigns, it's fascinating how some election victories these days hinge on digital savvy. You've got candidates who can meme their way into the hearts of voters or harness data to hit just the right demographic sweet spot. Smartphones might as well be soapboxes now. Look at Obama's 2008 run. That was a master class in digital campaigning, right? What are your thoughts on these pixelated campaign trails?
Pixelated campaign trails, huh? Well, Joe, it's pretty wild when you think about it. Back in the day, handshakes and baby kissing were the ticket. Now it's tweets, TikToks, and targeted ads. Those clicks and swipes have serious clout, and you can't ignore the analytics armies standing by to parse every like and share. It all feeds into this beast of big data that campaigns use to micro-target voters, like Cupid's arrow, but for choosing presidents. The digital strategy game has gone from checkers to 3D chess. Future candidates better be ready to play, or they'll find themselves on Readjustment Street with a vote for me sign and no audience.
So, I ran for student council back in college, a far cry from presidential, but stick with me. My campaign was all posters and flyers, handmade, each one. Then there's this guy, let's call him Tech Tom. He made a website, had online signups for volunteers, and even coded a simple game where you'd clean the campus virtually to highlight his green policies. I was out there talking to folks face to face, while Tom was building an email list, scheduling texts about meeting points for rallies. Who won? Well, it wasn't the dude with the staple gun and a stack of paper. It blew my mind, Simon. That's when I realized digital wasn't just the future, it was the now. And while I'm not bitter, okay, maybe a little, it taught me one heck of a lesson on evolution, even at the micro level of a college election.
Your tale of woe and tech. Fascinating stuff. But hold up, let's not get all misty-eyed over digital. Sure, Tech Tom coded his way to the top, but what about that personal touch? Those good old days when looking someone in the eye meant more than a like or retweet? Consider campaign code all you want, but remember, a computer doesn't shake hands. There's power in pressing flesh, in really listening to voters, not just shooting them an emoji-filled text. We're social animals, Joe, and last time I checked, screens don't do empathy. So yeah, folks gotta use tech smartly, but let's not forget we're human beings here, buddy, not walking screens. Maybe next time face those tech toms with both a staple gun and a smart hashtag. Embrace evolution, sure, but don't let it make you extinct.
You're absolutely right, Simon. Personal touch is key. But let's spread out some facts on the digital campaign quilt here. Technology has truly revolutionized political campaigning far beyond our college escapades. Take, for instance, data analytics. Campaigns now use sophisticated data mining to understand voter segments better than ever. They dissect everything from donation patterns to social media sentiments, creating highly personalized messaging tactics. Then there's the social media factor. President Trump in 2016 and AOC in 2018 turned Twitter into a direct line to voters. It's like a 24/7 rally with instant feedback. And don't forget about micro-targeting ads. Cambridge Analytica infamously showed the world both the capabilities and dangers of personal data use in elections by influencing voter opinions through micro-targeted content in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. They made it all too clear that information is power, and whoever wields data well wins big or risks controversy. Also, mobile apps developed specifically for campaigns allow supporters to engage in virtual door-knocking. Obama's app back in 2012 set the bar for this, guiding volunteers to potential voters' doors armed with tailored conversation points based on collected data insights. Future campaigns will likely blend tech even more. Think augmented reality for viral campaign events, or AI-managed personal assistants automating volunteer coordination and strategy adjustments in real time. The tools are evolving, but the essence remains classic, building human connections. And this digital duality is something every future candidate needs to balance with care.
Ha! You know what's wild, Joe. As much as I give tech some serious side-eye, part of me can't wait for the first holographic handshakes. Imagine voting because a candidate's avatar won rock, paper, scissors against yours. Now that's a debate for the future.
No doubt, Simon. And picture the debate stage, holograms throwing down virtual policies like some sci-fi parliament. Politics would literally pop up in your living room. That's either a tech utopia or a Black Mirror episode waiting to happen.
Totally, Joe. Candidate holograms duking it out in 3D might as well sell popcorn. Just hope my living room doesn't become a dystopian VR battleground.
Well, Simon, this campaign convo is only scratching the surface. I'm curious to see how this all plays out, whether tech will truly make campaigns more democratic or just turn them into popularity contests with shinier tools. There's a big chat to be had about ethics, regulations, and privacy in the digital campaign arena. What's around the cyber corner for democracy? Only time will tell.
Jumping from campaigns to the cyber battlefield, you've got to wonder if that whole ethics and regulation mess bleeds over into international stuff. Like, can countries play nice in the vast digital sandbox? Cyber treaties sound as likely as me giving up pizza on Fridays. But hey, we've made weirder stuff work. Can't countries figure out a digital handshake deal?
Simon, digital handshake deals between countries? That's like trying to fit the internet into a briefcase. It's tricky. Here's the deal. International treaties work because there's mutual gain, right? Sharing resources, defense agreements, there's tangible stuff on the line. But with cyber treaties, how do you police it? The internet is this wild west where everyone's wearing cloaks of anonymity. Plus, we've seen enough movies about hackers trashing cities from their hideouts. It's like whack-a-mole with no mole and an invisible hammer. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the stakes and the stage are different. The tools used in cyber attacks, malware, viruses, they don't carry flags. It's hard to sign a treat when half the time we can't even identify the perps. And trust, that's harder to build online than in person. Digital footprints vanish faster than sandcastles at high tide.
Sure, cyber treaties are as elusive as a silent cat on the internet, a rare beast. But let's not crown ourselves defeatist kings just yet. Sure, signatures on digital paper are about as secure as ice cream in the Sahara, but without trying to forge some cyber unity, aren't we just inviting chaos to dinner? Imagine nations actually shaking hands in cyberspace. Would it be perfect? Nope. But heck, even Cold War foes had a hotline. Why can't our modern digital overlords build a decent sandbox where they can at least agree not to kick sand in each other's faces? Might sound naive, but if they don't, ain't no firewall strong enough to stop the backlash.
Hey, latecomers, welcome aboard. You're smack in the middle of a juicy chat about whether nations can find common ground in the cyber world. We're tossing around ideas on cyber treaties. Think international digital handshakes that promise not to unleash internet chaos on each other. It's like agreeing not to hack or spread digital mayhem. It's no cakewalk, though. Identifying the rogues behind the screens ain't easy, and building trust online is tougher than a $2 steak. Still, we're pondering over whether this could be the peace pipe of the future or just wishful thinking. Cyber unity, dream or potential disaster-averting strategy. Stick with us as we dig deeper.
Sure thing, folks tuning in. Here's the skinny. Cyber treaties are like agreements, but digital and with a lot more code involved. We're talking countries coming together to say, let's not hack each other into oblivion. Sounds good on paper, but enforcing it? That's one heck of a head-scratcher. Because in cyberspace, there's no crime scene tape, no fingerprints. Things happen at the speed of light, and culprits can be oceans away, sipping tea while chaos unfolds. So how do we build trust when we can't even see who we're trusting? The benefit of cyber treaties could be huge. Global rules of engagement, clarity on what's fair game and what's foul play. But you gotta ask, is it possible to make it work when everyone's behind a mask? Or are we setting up for a digital disaster where the promise is only as good as the next keyboard cowboy's sense of honor? The plot thickens.
A cyber treaty is kind of like installing a new software update. It promises to fix bugs and protect you from the latest viruses, but half the time it resets your password and you forget it right after. And just when you think all nations got the memo, someone's still running on Windows 95, clicking banner ads promising them a free iPhone.
Oh, and wouldn't that be quite the scene? The digital world's movers and shakers swearing they've got their act together, only to have one rogue click bring it all tumbling down. I mean, can you really trust a cyber treaty when at any second, some nation-state hacker might find a shiny new exploit? So here's the hard drive crunching question. Are we living in La La Land, thinking we can all agree not to unleash our worms, the computer kind, thank you very much, on each other? Without a global geek squad to enforce things, it's like making rules for ghosts. They're there, then poof, gone. And let's not even start on the countries treating these potential treaties like toilet paper. Hate to be the screen smudger here, but without everyone playing ball and keeping their tech updated, it's just another set of good intentions paving the road to digital anarchy. Cyber trust is harder to come by than a phone charger at a conference. But hey, maybe this chaos is just the boot-up sequence for a more secure cyberspace. Or perhaps we're all just stuck in a perpetual loading screen of doom.
Hello to all you digital dwellers just tuning in. You're diving into the deep end of our cyber pool as we splash around the idea of nations crafting cyber treaties. Yep, like peace accords, but for the online world. Basically, picture countries pinky swearing not to hack each other to smithereens. We've been chewing over whether this is tech utopia or setting ourselves up for a fail. How do we enforce these deals when hackers are more slippery than wet soap? There's some laughs because honestly, keeping track of digital promises feels more confusing than explaining hashtags to your grandma. Bottom line, global internet agreement, a blue screen of peace, or just a fantasy spam folder? Keep listening as we Control-Alt-Delve into this some more.
All right, cybermates, let's reboot and break it down. Cyber treaties, they're like a digital Geneva Convention, a set of rules for nations to play fair in the murky online waters. The goal? To stave off mass cyber attacks that could cripple countries faster than you can say, internet outage. The hitch? Enforcement is murkier than my coffee after I forget I already added sugar. With hackers launching attacks from anonymous hidey holes, pinning blame is tougher than finding a quiet spot at a kid's birthday party. Plus, the issue of trust. How do we install that? It's about crafting rules that all countries can hit agree on. No small task when some folks wouldn't agree on the color of an orange. Cyber treaties could lay foundations for security, sure, but without every player genuinely on board, it's about as effective as yelling, "Don't crash," in a bumper cars arena. And with that, dear listeners, shall we keep riding the cyber wave, or are we ready to surf onto the next digital dilemma? Keep your ears glued. The conversation never ends here at Infinite Podcast.
Let's not forget, whoever controls these cyber rules could end up with the keys to the kingdom. Talk about an episode of Geek Game of Thrones.
Okay, swinging by with some cold water here. The keys to the kingdom scenario assumes there's a single throne in cyberspace. There isn't. Instead of one ruler calling the shots, we need consensus among nations. Treaties aren't about handing over control. They're meant to be mutually beneficial shields, not swords. Here's the logic. Cyberspace is decentralized. No single entity, state, or individual can claim absolute command without others noticing and raising flags. History shows us that true stability comes from balanced power. Think back to the Cold War. Mutually assured destruction? Mad? It wasn't pretty, but it kept nukes in check because no party wanted total annihilation. Translating that to cyber norms, treaties are about creating a swath of checks and balances that operates under collective governance, not dictatorship. That fact alone challenges the fear of a digital despot. Plus, it's got to be all for one for all. Otherwise, what's stopping someone from pressing the metaphorical big red button?
That's the thing, Simon. It's like we're all wearing floaties in the deep end of the pool, hoping other swimmers won't bring sharks. There's a delicate dance between trust and verification that's way harder online. Listeners, we've navigated the digital streams and even dipped our toes into some murky cyber waters today. Thanks for tuning in to Infinite Podcast and diving deep with us. Your company on this wild ride through the data waves means everything. Make sure you come back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for more lively debates and heartfelt banter. Until next time, keep those screens clean and your minds sharper. Catch you on the flip side.